Welcome to the series Soul Talks, where we will be having deep conversations and dialogue with the sages and intellectuals of our time. Why Soul Talks? Because we will be exploring the soul of a person, a society, even the soul of the economy, and as such, what happens when we lose contact with our souls. Modern society lacks any explicit support as we transit from one phase to another. One of the many reasons for this situation is that modern society has become so fragmented and heterogeneous that generalized rites of passage that are designed for overtly homogeneous societies won't provide the necessary meaning anymore. Furthermore, we are living in an age of transition without a clear picture as yet where our collective journeys are going. Today, individuals are required to master the transition connected to one's life phases through as much more individualized, self-reflective, and self-responsible process. Today, my guest is Professor Ronnie Lessem. He has authored some 50 books, and he is also the co-founder of Trans4m movement, and also the theory of, on integral four worlds and integral development. I'm here today with my teacher, my mentor, Professor Ronnie Lessem, who is a phenomenal researcher and also what we call an integrator and societal social innovator who has his fingers on the pulse of many societies. He's worked around the world with many societies. When I say society, he will explain furthermore what do we mean by when we say having a finger on the pulse of a society. He's worked in Africa mainly, but also the Middle East, and he's doing some phenomenal work nowadays, especially about what happens when societies lose their soul, or what I call it a soul, that societies lose their soul or the direction, their context, the purpose. And Ronnie is extensively researching on this. Also, as you would have noticed that on my channel, I talk about the gene rhythm. So here is the person who actually came up with this, the whole idea of the gene rhythm and how societies or organizations have within their DNA a genius that is locked there. So over to Ronnie, and welcome to Soul Talks. So my first question to you is, what happens that then when societies lose their soul? And welcome.
Okay, thank you, Aneeqa. I'll start off with maybe a simple explanation, but given that it's such a complex question, I'll then try and go into more complexity. Two things simply. The one is what we're really talking about is not just losing your soul, because a society with a soul and nothing else gets nowhere fast. So we need, if you like, body, mind, spirit, and soul, and all of those four elements working together. And of course, that is well articulated by many thinkers as applied to an individual, but what does it mean applied to a society? That's what we're actually talking about. So that's on the one hand. How do we actually bring to bear and reconcile all of those forces? On the other hand, and this is absolutely critical, there is no agency in society that can actually make this happen. And that is the catastrophe of our time, that no politics, no economics, even civil society on its own is capable of bringing these forces together. The end result in the most dramatic terms today is Vladimir Putin. And what we see in Russia today, beyond the tragedy of everyday events with Ukraine, is in a sense a readout of a society which is totally lost its soul and is unable to bring body, mind, spirit, and soul together. So I'll give one further illustration of what that means in a Russian context, because I should add that there are two major issues of our time as far as I'm concerned. The one is climate change. And frankly, there are many, many people, thankfully, actually dealing with it. There should be more. But there's very little we can add to what already is a very rich area of concern. Where we do come in is how to prevent the world from having another Vladimir Putin. And I would add to that, and this is the catastrophic failure of the United Nations, I would add to the Putin phenomenon, if you like, a functional economy within a society. Because one of our blind spots, and coming from Southern Africa, which is my heritage, both South Africa and Zimbabwe, South Africa probably better known to people. You can have a Nelson Mandela, for all his glory, and many very fine people who followed in his wake. And South Africa at the time, the new South Africa, gave birth to probably the most functional politics in Africa. But economically, it's a disaster story, right? And if a country is economically a disaster story, whatever you have in your society, whatever polity, whatever civil society, it just ain't going to work. Oh. One more thing then on Russia, and maybe then, Aneeqa, I'll pause and you might want to pick up some threads. One of the books that I wrote in 2016 heavily featured Russia. It was actually about emerging economies, but I said more than emerging economies, we're talking of emerging economies and societies. I took two in particular, South Africa and Russia, South Africa being north-south and Russia being east-west, but I also then considered China and India and Brazil as emerging economies. Russia has the most extraordinary rich heritage, not just in terms of the arts, which we know very well. We all know about Tchaikovsky, and we know about Chekhov, and we know about the Bolshoi Ballet, and we know about Dostoevsky. But in addition to that, Russia has an enormous rich philosophical heritage. We've heard of Tolstoy, that there are many others, Berdyaev and so on. It actually has a very rich economic heritage. It had a major set of economic thinkers along the lines of what was called Cosmism. It even had a part of Russia, which is well documented, one of the provinces of Russia in the 19th century, which actually brought all these elements together. And you say to yourself, what can happen to a society which had all of these elements, has all of these elements, even had a part of the country where these elements came together in the 19th century, and now it's such a catastrophe. So what's happened to its body, its mind, its spirit, and its soul, so that this overweighted, pathological, psychopathic body of Putin actually creates the cancer that we see before us. And the big issue we've been dealing with through TCA is how do you bring those set of forces together? The gene, as Aneeqa said, the grounding, which, if you like, to actually ground in the soul of a particular place, to emerge through the spirit of the place, to navigate through the mind of the place, and then to embody all of those previous elements as an integral whole. What does that actually look like? How does it work? And what kind of communiversity, which is the key term we use for these set of agencies, can we actually build in that society so that body, mind, spirit, and soul can come together?
Thank you. Yes, this was quite complex, I know, but you just presented Russia as an example. If we come to the UK, I would like you to pick that up, that what happened to the UK as well, because of course you and I, we live here. And without going into politics, I know that we avoid this topic, but politics plays a major role in all this. When I say soul, as in philosophically, what makes a nation or a society, what's in their foundations. So I'm just referring to that. And you and I are a big fan of Ibn Khaldun, who's also in the 14th century. He mapped it out, and he said that societies go through this rise and fall. There is a decline, especially when there's a moral degradation and people become too material. And of course, this is a very secular society as well. Do you think that plays a role as well in all this?
Okay, so we'll come to the UK, and just to pick up one thread about Ibn Khaldun, who I've just been writing about now. And of course, the contemporary version of Ibn Khaldun was picked up by Majid Rahnema, the Iranian American development economist who talked about a society's social immune system. And if you like, he took Asabiyah from Ibn Khaldun and said that we all need a social immune system. And the collapse of the health service in Britain today, if not in other societies, is to me symptomatic of the neglect of our social immune system, which of course literally the health system represents, but metaphorically we're talking about much more than the health system per se. If we come to the UK, our argument is that each society, some more richly than others, have all of the elements, the body, the mind, the spirit, and the soul contained with them, but they either don't recognize them or one is just is overbearing in relation to another. In the United Kingdom, there are 4 constituent societies. The point is that the one, which we call the body of the UK, which is England, dominates over the others. But the soul of the British Isles, not the UK, the British Isles, actually rests in Ireland. Ireland is like the shadow of England. We're very involved with Ireland, so we've discovered a lot about it. Of course, we're well aware of the Irish literature and cultural heritage, where, in a sense, the soul of the British Isles rests. So the soul place is Ireland. Ireland was colonized. It's not colonized today in the same way. But in a sense, things don't change that dramatically. The spirit of the British Isles is Wales. That's what we call the Eastern, the Druidic culture of Wales. And then the Gaelic culture of Ireland is our south, is our grounding.
And Scotland.
And then Scotland is the north, right? Scotland is, if you look, the mild and the mind, the Scottish Enlightenment. So generically, in answer to your question, Aneeqa, what's happened in the UK is, in a sense, we have totally distorted who we are by the predominance of the English. Of course, Brexit being an embodiment of that in recent times. So the other soul forces lose out along the way. Not only do they lose out along the way, but if you don't have body, mind, spirit, and soul working together, you know, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, the result is the kind of disaster story that you have. Now, of course, to say that sounds a bit esoteric. I mean, can you really attribute what's happening in this country? We have to add for that, of course, global forces, right? The global economizing and financializing of the world is revisited writ large within the United Kingdom. So we are subject to these kinds of world forces. And the very reason that these world forces dominate is because they're not really world forces. They're predominantly Western forces. The West dominates the world. The West is borne out now in China and India, which is becoming westernized in its own way. So the other factor, Aneeqa, in terms of what's happening in this country, besides failing to draw on its own body, mind, spirit and soul, is these globalizing forces. And these globalizing forces arise because different parts of the world don't actually assert themselves for who they are. And the rest is history, as we say.
So could that also refer to when you say they don't, other forces do not assert themselves? I was talking to John Hilbrey, our friend, and he said that migration has played a huge role in the making of the UK society as we see it now. And that's where we've gone wrong, as in we lost our own identity or our own philosophical thinking and foundation. Would you say it contributes to that, especially now that you and I are also researching on the Islamic impulse, which is quite evident, and it's very emergent in the UK society? What would you say to that?
So again, of course, that's a very complex issue, because in one sense, I would correct myself from what I said before, and the British Isles is not just the 4 nations, the 4 peoples, the 4 societies, the 4 soul forces, but it has many immigrants who, ironically, in a sense, are most particularly probably part of the English psyche, because although all of the nations have the immigrants, in a sense, the English, in a sense, took the lead, partly colonization, then attracting people from all over the world, so that all of the world lives within us. Now, John Hilbrey is saying that is maybe disconnecting ourselves from who we are. I think it's kind of a yes and no.
Mhm.
The yes is yes, to the extent that we look outside and we saw all these people from different, just travel on the tube in London today, and we lose sight of who we are. On the other hand, we can only become ourselves through others, right? And
Yeah.
those others are not only the Scottish, the Irish, and the Welsh in England, but they're also the Pakistanis and the Nigerians and all of these people from other parts of the world. We need these others to become ourselves, not only because that is the way the world is going, ever more cosmopolitan, but as you and I realize, myself as a Zimbabwean, as you as a Pakistani, without the outsiders looking inward,
Mhm.
the inward never realizes who they are, right? So it needs these external elements to externalize what is inside a particular society. So I'd
Thank
agree
you.
and disagree.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So going back to the agency you referred to, that there is no such agency. Do you think there is any solution? Because of course, the agency is given to the institutions we've built, and especially the universities who hold the key to, they think they are doing all this research. What is blocking that now? What is blocking the universities or the institutions to looking deeply into what you and I are discussing here?
This is a huge issue and an issue very dear to our hearts because Aneeqa and myself and many of our kindred spirits, in a sense, have one foot very much in the university world. This is my heritage. I studied at London School of Economics, at Harvard, and these kinds of prestigious university places, and undoubtedly they have a place in the world. That's on the plus side. On the minus side, to us, to a catastrophic degree, they are not playing the role that universities, in our eyes, are supposed to play, and that is to be a catalyst for the regeneration of a society. Every society gets lost for the reason that we've just been saying. And of all the agencies around, together with others, a university can't sit as an ivory tower and play that role. But together with governments, communities, enterprises, laboratories, and so on, the university interinstitutionally should actually play that catalytic role. Now, why isn't it doing so? Which is, to me, a living catastrophe because of what we've just explained. The one is, in a sense, is the very perception of a university as a kind of standalone entity. And the closest we get to being otherwise is no, we serve the needs of the community. But
Mm-hmm.
in our eyes, in our university eyes, it's much more than serving the needs of a community. The first thing is you need to identify what kind of community are we? A university in England, in the British Isles, should be something fundamentally different from a university in Pakistan or Nigeria. We should be contextualized in the history and the philosophy and the culture and the soul of our particular peoples and evolve from our peoples. Now, that we patently are not doing. We're basically mimicking, by and large, the Anglo-Saxon or the Germanic or perhaps the French kind of universities. So that's one massive failure in our universities, that they kind of mimic particular parts of the world, the minority world. The second is that it's more than serving the community. It's bringing the community into the university and the university into the community. That's what we call developing learning communities. One of the catastrophes of the university is it serves individuals. Now, whenever we say that, people are saying, but what else is the university is about? We have students. And I'm saying, absolutely not. Yes, we have students, but students come from communities. And to the extent that you develop students, individuals, give them to degrees, very often you disconnect them from their communities. They become part of an elite, which actually crushes their community. So in that sense, that's another fault line. So the one is they're decontextualized. The second is they're decommunalized and overly individualized. The third one is that, to me, the major function of a university, not the only one, because it should be this interinstitutional agency, is to have a research academy, which in a sense becomes the beacon or the container for the regeneration of the society. If you like, the intellectual pinnacle in the best sense, not in the ivory tower sense, but in the sense that we need intellect, we need mind forces to actually regenerate our societies. universities are patently failing in that respect. And the only place we actually see that taking place, and it does take place, to take my hat off to some of the elite universities, is through some great individuals in these universities. So the Dabashis of this world, the Edward Syeds of this world, maybe even, although I don't like a lot of what he does, but I've got to take my hat off, the Jeffrey Sachs of these world. You know, there are significant individuals in universities, but they don't represent the institution, right? They are just great public intellectuals who assert themselves on
Could become the institutions themselves, like you are an institution into your own self for all of us. So they should become the institutions. And I think they are the institutions because they do, spread the message around, and that is raising people's awareness or consciousness. Do you think that serves the purpose? And also, I was thinking, if we start doing that, what you are proposing or we are working towards, would you say that you're just playing devil's advocate here? The society, would you not say the society will become more fragmented because now we are really dividing, as in this is your context, this is my context, and we are, working towards that. Like, this is the Scottish, the main soul of Scotland, or the spirit of Scotland. And then there is Wales, and which is, I think, is happening now, that we are waking up to that reality, and people have started using this term, four nations. So I know there are two questions here.
So I think my answer, Aneeqa, would be that in a sense, we have these divides anyway. If we don't have what I would call healthy divides, which in the social scientific literature is called differentiation as well as integration. If you don't have healthy differentiation, you'll have unhealthy. So to take the Scottish case, for centuries, you have the rivalries between Celtic and Rangers football clubs, right?
Yes.
That would be an unhealthy divide, which just goes on forever and ever after. So I prefer the healthy divide. So what are the healthy divides or differentiations? There are differentiations within the differentiation. On the one hand, you bring together body, mind, spirit, and soul. So it's a subtle differentiation. It's not just a surface differentiation. It's a whole differentiation. The second is that differentiation also needs integration. So you're always recognizing the other. So the English is recognizing the Welsh, and the Welsh is recognizing the English for what they bring to the party. Because as my old colleague Lawrence van der Post said, every culture is an idiom and beauty, right? And we need all these idioms and beauty. So my response would be those divides are there anyway. So we need healthy rather than unhealthy divides.
True. So what about the institutions, coming back to that?
So I guess in our field, and as Aneeqa knows, we can't do everything, so we have to choose. The one is to resurrect or regenerate the university. So university is this combination of learning communities, people on genuine transformation journeys. It shouldn't just happen as part of your Sufi journey. It should be part of your university, in quotes. The laboratories that need to work alongside the economic, socioeconomic laboratories, and the research academy. So that's the one kind of regeneration. Now the other kind, and I'm working on one such case at the moment together with Aneeqa, which is the whole MENA region, is within a whole region, our priority, because we can't do everything. we're not going to create a new United Nations, but we'd love to play a part in it. Right? We're not going to create a new Russia as a whole, but we want to play a part in it. What we directly want to contribute in relation to your question, Aneeqa, is the regeneration of economies around the world. So we have economies that reflect particular societies. Now, we can't do that for 150 different societies. That's too much of a task for us. We can do two things. The one is we can create the overall architecture, the gene that Aneeqa referred to, that each society needs to work its economy through genetically. And the other is we want to co-create and co-evolve 5 major economies in this world. Not one, there used to be 2, the second kind of faded away, the communist version, not one capitalist, but 5. One from the south, one from the east, one from the north, one from the west, And the one we're currently working on is one from MENA, which is one from the center.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other major reconstituting activity we're involved in. And of course, we can only do it together with others, together with other enterprises and societies.
Mm-hmm. So I know, let's go to MENA now and the center, as you say. And and you have written about it, if the center doesn't hold, then there is disintegration. And going back to all the spiritual or the faith traditions, Abrahamic or otherwise, MENA was the place, was the center. Is that what you're referring to? Because many people won't understand why you're calling it the center. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so we're referring geographically to what is called the center of the world, the Middle East. The people living in that region prefer to call themselves MENA, Middle East and North Africa. So geographically, that's the case. Secondly, to say, Aneeqa, why is it that the three major peoples of the book, the three major traditional religions, not all of them, but three of them or four of them, if you add Zoroastrianism, came from that part of the world, about that part of the world. And of course, historically, if we go back not to modern times where Europe and America dominated, now, of course, the Far East, but historically, Mesopotamia, Egypt, these kinds of cultures and civilizations were hugely influential on the evolution of humankind. So all of these elements make this an important place to center upon, which we then call the center. Now, what we mean by the center is somewhat influenced by those societies we've been able to work with over the past 20 to 30 years. And therefore, in a sense, we have selected those because we always work with particular societies and particular organizations. We don't just work with ideas or, if you like, the people on the ground. They have to be in between entities, enterprises that we work with. Recently, we discovered the extraordinary work of Abdullah Öcalan, Kurdistan. And to me, he is probably the most seminal thinker, in my eyes, about that region as a whole. So why do I actually say that, and why is that important? Because the second thing about Kurdistan, as you probably know, is there's West Kurdistan, East Kurdistan, North Kurdistan, and South Kurdistan. It's the one society stroke country, is not a country, which actually has four worlds within it, which rub shoulders with the respective countries that each of these worlds, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran, actually embodies. So that's a second factor. So we actually have Kurdistan as a centerpiece in that respect, that it actually crosses our four worlds. In relation to that, we then draw on particular societies which we feel are seminal in their importance and significance for the evolution of MENA, the one being Egypt, ancient Egypt, the other two being Israel and Palestine, right? And then the fourth one being Iran, Persia, right? So we've actually taken those. Of course, there are many other countries, but we've taken those ones which we feel have a seminal influence on that part of the world, and then tried to uncover the body, mind, heart, spirit, and soul of those particular countries, how they might complement each other. I'll say one other thing, and this insight actually comes from Öcalan. Because Öcalan is saying two things. One is that the ancient heritage of that land, MENA, was Neolithic matriarchal womanhood, right? So the whole image of that part of the world, patriarchal, is a total corruption of its origins. What he has done and what we're doing is we're picking up on what he's saying and beginning to embody that in activities and enterprises we see on the ground in that part of the world, like, for example, MedLabs that you know very well, Aneeqa, in Jordan, which is basically mainly women, right? And the extraordinary Rojava, the Rojava, which virtually nobody knows about in northern Syria, a tragic part of the world at the moment. I hope that's not too affected by the earthquake, where women are playing the most extraordinary role, probably more so than anywhere in the world, right? So we're picking up on that original impulse, which Öcalan also says the Middle East, MENA, needs to become a visible antithesis to the Western European world in order to create a new synthesis, which will emerge from the center.
I would say yes, and it's happening in most of the Middle Eastern countries. I mean, look at Saudi, how the women are now leading. Most big organizations, women are leading
Really?
without the world taking notice, maybe. So yes, you are right. And I've always said this about Pakistani or this Indian region as well, that it is a very matriarchal society. It used to be. It's still ruled. Like we have this strong family system, and women just play a major, major role. Men literally bow down to them, they surrender there. So it is a very matriarchal society in so many ways. But as you rightly said, that we take a wrong turn, or maybe we don't recognize the real force or what is working really, the undercurrents of a society which needs to be picked up and what we are working on. So we believe we are doing an important work, but maybe it's still not, your work is not recognized in the way you have, educated all of us as well. And the credit goes to you, how I see the world now. So coming back to maybe, is there a solution? Because we need a practical solution as well for all this, or we can just keep on talking. What is the quick and easy? I'm not saying quick fixes. I don't believe in those.
Yeah.
Where do we start from?
Yeah. I mean, it's an important question because you have to start from somewhere, and it has to be something specific and concrete because of the massive, massive complexities we're dealing with.
Yeah.
If we have
Sorry, just to add, I mean, where to start is starting with the people, because it's not going to happen on a state level or government level, as we know. But then people's movement, it gets kind of diluted, and it's still not picked up on a societal level.
So at a societal level, and as we've discussed very often, Aneeqa and our colleagues, we're saying the starting point is this notion of a communiversity. Bear in mind, in the history of the evolution of our thought, we started with the integral worlds in the 1990s, wrote books about integral worlds, integral enterprise, integral research, integral development, and so on, integral community. But then we said, your question, what is the vehicle which can make this all happen? So we need this vehicle, which is the communiversity, right? Now, of course, a community-university in itself is not straightforward and simple, but at least you can say, well, you need 4 elements, right? So you need that kind of research academy, which we're talking about, which is essentially rooted in your society. You need these laboratories of enterprises which reflect the future. You need these communities that you're actually working with on the ground, hundreds and thousands of people. And you need people, as you know, as a Sufi, Aneeqa, who are visibly on a transformation journey. You need to bring all these elements together. Of course, that's easier said than done, right? But that's what we're practically and specifically working on as a way forward. And the one other thing I would say for any of us sort of on this journey, and Aneeqa, this just came to me the other day, I was thinking about it, is that in the days when, in a sense, the formative work was being done along the lines of what we're talking about, it was also sponsored by people who, in a sense, kind of gave you free rein and said, I like what you're saying, seems good to me. Africa needs a kind of new kind of economy, the sort of thing you're talking about, but needs much more attention. Go ahead, right? The minute you start getting into EU projects and these projects and that projects, it kind of derails you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And this is one of the elements we need to deal with, all of us, because we need this funding. But
you rightly picked this up, because remember, you've done so much research on, you and I are big fans of the House of Wisdom as Baitul Hikmah. And this is what was happening there. The emperors at that time were not only giving a free rein, but also they were supporting them financially, so people like you and me can carry on with this important work. So yeah, that is one huge missing element, because you have grants and fundings you have to apply for, and it takes forever, but nobody is I mean, you and I know this, that nobody's understanding maybe that this is very important work that you are doing, we are doing together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So I still have some time. Maybe quickly talk about your transformation journey, just quickly.
Well, quickly, because we want to round up, but
you know about my 4Ds. So if we say we take the transmutation, which is of course your grounding, your gene grounding, and I call it transmutation. So what was your point of transmutation? What transmuted for you?
I think it's the accident of my birth, the fact that I was born in Africa, in Black Africa, predominantly Black Africa, but of Central European parents from Russia and Austria in what was an English colony. So if you think of that kind of accident of birth with all of these different forces in the relation to the transmutation, either you just get buried under the weight of one in particular, right? Become an Englishman, as many of my colleagues, or you wrestle with these forces, which I was obliged to do because I had this maybe sensitivity that all of these were different soul forces, which I needed to give expression to. And that is where actually the journey began, the transmutation, as you put it. I would add probably the other important, well, two other important elements. One is my birthplace was Africa. And if you like, that is a part of the world which, in a sense, was not making any visible contribution to the world. It was already the time where Asia was beginning to emerge. Europe and America already had emerged. But what place did Africa have in the world? And the other element is coming from a business family. So that side was kind of drawn towards and dragged towards that business economic realm. Right? So my natural evolution would have been towards culture, psychology, anthropology, right? But I was taken into that world. So it was the juxtaposition of economy and enterprise with soul forces of the particular societies. And because I was born in Africa, but of European parents and English colony, and was actually very drawn to Indian philosophy from a very early stage, that brought that Eastern element. That confluence of forces was sort of what gave rise to what followed. And maybe the latter day, two accidents of birth and accident of studentship, the fact that I gravitated towards the London School of Economics and Harvard meant that I had something very real as a counterforce. You know, I had those prestigious universities, which could be a more authentic counterforce to going to any old university and saying, I don't like what they do. If you go to the pinnacle of the university world and find some fundamental fault lines, then in a sense you have a case in point to kind of evolve further. And together with that, probably given my business economic background, that never doing it in isolation from the business economic world, that I never wanted to leave that world behind, but had to keep connected. So community, laboratory, journey. And the academy is this continued search for the truth, which probably has something to do, probably, with my Jewish heritage. I think that there's something about this search for perfection. I've just been reading Maimonides, and he writes about it. The search for perfection, ongoing.
Yes, yes. So you didn't lose your soul then. You followed your soul. And it's interesting how you put it, because I just realized this is who we are, that all these confluence of many cultures and identities and, you know, our own pursuits. I can't call myself an authentic Pakistani, though I feel I am. But then, you know, there are the other influences. And this is the story of our world nowadays. We can't call someone just Pakistani or South African or Zimbabwean. We are everything, which is interesting. So thank you so much for this lovely conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
You too. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.